Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The A Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Better Way to Farm. We're excited for you guys to tune in today. We're going to do a series here featuring different growers who've worked with us for various lengths of time, from just a couple of years to many years. And we are very, very lucky today because our first guest is someone who I've known for a long time, and we've been friends for many years. And I'd like to welcome Scott. Thank you for taking some time and sharing with us today. Anyhow, so you live out there in central South Dakota, where in the wintertime it gets very cold, and in the summertime it gets very hot. And so it is always interesting to see the kind of stress that your crops go through. But Scott, let's go back to the beginning. How long have you been working with us here at A Better Way to Farm?
I started working in the fall of 2014.
2014. So this was your 11th growing season. That's pretty cool.
Yes.
So what attracted you to us in the first place? What made you reach out?
I guess when I was first joined or, looked at the programs and things, I was chasing yield and working with the National Corn Growers Contest. And a lot of the people I was looking at and things they were doing had a similar theme, and they were using some of these products and things. And I guess as I was in the pursuit of increasing my own yield goals, and that's kind of what led me to asking more questions about it.
Excellent. How did you actually find us? I don't remember, did you come in off of a social media, like through Facebook, or how did you find us the first time?
I actually came in off Facebook when you guys got started on, when I first got started on there and started noticing some of your feeds and pages, and just followed you for a bit on there and some of the stuff you had. And then I reached out and called you guys, and ended up talking to you.
Excellent. Yeah, that was a very great day for me. I'm glad we got to get acquainted and get out to see you guys. And I love it out there where you're at. It's very beautiful. So Scott, talk to me. Let's go ahead and go down the hole here of the yield deal. You've won some contests here over the years. What all have you won?
In 2015 was the South Dakota Dryland Corn Growers Contest, state dryland winner.
Okay. And then did you do some stuff with wheat also?
A number of wheat trials and stuff, working with some big name companies, either through research or large yield trials for various companies.
Let's talk about that for a little bit, because I think one of the things that you've been able to do is you've kind of changed your nitrogen program on your wheat. Am I correct in that?
Both my wheat and my corn has changed drastically in the last 5 years.
So tell us what you were doing before, tell us what you've done since, and tell us what results you're getting.
So I guess initially we were primarily a broadcast system in the fall. We transitioned to then doing half our broadcast in the fall and then the spring, trying to get away from maybe potentially losing some of our nitrogen. And then we transitioned to almost entirely all spring broadcast. And then we went into like a liquid stream bar on the wheat. And then with the corn, we started Y dropping. And now in the last, I think this makes 3 years, maybe 4 years on the corn and 3 years on the wheat, we've been pretty much entirely liquid at pre-plant through in-season application and no broadcast anymore.
Excellent. And I might point out that this isn't because you're buying something from A Better Way to Farm or from the team. We don't sell nitrogen. And so,
No.
But this is stuff that you have learned from going to the fundamentals of agronomy. Is that where you picked these ideas up at?
A lot of it was, as far as the leaching and other losses of nitrogen and stuff, was things we've been talking about for years. And obviously the nitrogen doesn't come from A Better Way to Farm. But some of these meetings, we start talking about efficiency, placement, and all these different things, and how other limiting factors. And that's where I learned at the fundamentals of agronomy training and started applying those things. And that enabled us to cut our nitrogen almost in half from what we were applying while maintaining our yields.
Wow. So you cut your in rate by almost 50% and your yields have remained constant.
Yes. And even increasing.
The yields have increased.
Yes.
That's kind of what the name of the game is right there. That's got to make a big swing in profitability for you. Talk about your corn. What kind of a reduction were you able to achieve in nitrogen rate on your corn, and what are your yields done?
On our corn, our overall average has gone up consistently every year. We continue to fine tune it and do a little bit more with foliar feeding and some timing of our nitrogen, or mixing in like an ATS or different sulfur product with our nitrogen to make it more efficient. at application. Just different tips we picked up at some of these meetings, and some of the fundamentals of science and soils that you've talked to us about and listened to on different either podcasts or at these meetings.
Excellent. So, like, what was your nitrogen rate before you started on this path per acre, and what is your nitrogen rate? What was it in 25?
We always use the standard 1.2. There's times we were well above that in our pursuit for contests, or even just trying to shoot for the moon on a field, and we were kind of doing it wrong, as we learn now. So what I'd say, we used 1.2 pretty consistently. We're down to about 0.67 now, is kind of where we've been the last 2 years. So it's
you've cut that almost in half. Yeah.
Yep.
1.2 to 0.67. That's amazing. And your yields have went up. Scott, I think the saddest thing I see is that there are so many people who are literally getting a yield decrease because they're overusing nitrogen. It just brings about plant health issues. It brings about potassium shortages. It brings about a zinc deficiency. When we overuse nitrogen, there are so many other things that it impacts. Disease, it just impacts so many things in a negative fashion. And just the mere fact that you dial that in and get it under control, and we're not here saying don't use any. We know we have to, or we believe you have to, but it sure does make a difference. What have you seen as far as standability and plant health as you've been on this journey?
That's the part that's probably been most shocking, with some of the extreme, whether the cold weather in the spring or especially the dry heat in the summer. You can kind of tell which fields are doing some of these programs and this intense management, because they'll still look healthier for 2 weeks longer than a field just down the road from it that is probably had just as many dollars spent on it or more. And the field still has a healthy appearance to it. You can see the ears, especially later in the season. And then even at harvest time, when you're driving the combine through the field yet, you still looks like the tires are driving through water in some cases because the stalks are so wet yet, but the corn's, and we don't have a problem with wet corn. That's not an issue for us. So it's pretty interesting to have a wet plant and a dry corn.
Well, it was at your field day a year ago. I'd always talked about, I've spoken for years about the fact that a plant would translocate moisture from the ear back into the ground. And one of the people who taught me early on always swore up and down by that. And I was at your place in the root pit, and I saw water dripping off of the roots. And need I remind you, Scott, it was about 104 when we got up there and hadn't rained in about a month. And so that water was definitely coming out of the grain, getting translocated back into the ground and actually drying down. Now, that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. In the process of doing that, as you've cut your nitrogen down and you've had plant health, I think that's one of the things, Scott, we believe that late season, the longer you can keep that plant green and the longer you can have that stay green in there, the longer the fill period. And that's where you get heavier test weight. That's where you get bigger kernels, and that's where you pick up a lot of bushels. Talk to me about your test weight overall. How has that done over the last, since you started back in 14 to today?
And I think a lot of that, especially probably in the foliar feeding, really applies to the test weight. Our wheat and our corn, we had 61, 62 pound test weight corn this year. And, that definitely equates to yield when you're talking pounds in the field, out of the field. So it's pretty exciting to see that kind of test weight and even the wheat. And I guess, when we talk about foliar feeding, how we really kind of push the protein, which a lot of times out here we get a premium on the protein also. So test weight equals bushels, protein a lot of times equals a premium for us, or for sure not a discount. So all those things are added dollars, in the field.
The bottom line is, even the people that don't pay a bonus for protein, they will dock you if it's not good enough.
Yep,
and so that's a real drag when that happens. One of the things, Scott, that we've learned through the small grains and stuff is that we believe that, more sulfur helps, a lower nitrogen rate helps with test weight. We've always been taught that, that nitrogen makes protein, and it does, but it's indirectly. And the bottom line is you have to have enough sulfur there to get the amino acids that will then convert into the protein. And if we have too much nitrate in that plant, that never happens. And so that increasing sulfur is one of the key components to doing that. I want to go back now, maybe where I should have started. Let's walk through the system. It's cold, it's miserable, and the ground is froze. However, I'm going to guess that you pulled some soil tests earlier this fall.
Yes, we pretty much sampled every field.
Okay. And why do you sample every acre on an annual basis, Scott?
We used to only sample our nitrogen using fields, our corn or wheat, so every 2 or every 3 years. And now we sample even our bean fields just because we manage our beans just as intensely as we do our corn or wheat. And on our place, our beans are probably our most profitable crop now that we're managing their needs properly.
Isn't it amazing when we don't, I jokingly say that some people think high management on soybeans is plant them, spray them, cut them, and complain about them. That's probably not the intensive practices that you're talking about.
No, no.
So you test both the corn, the beans, and the wheat, and then you come in and you row place nutrients in the seed trench, correct?
Yep. We row place on corn, beans, and wheat in the seed trench. Pretty much try to follow the prescription that each field gets from the soil sample. If we can't do it in the trench, we'll do it in a foliar application later on.
Absolutely. One of the things that I learned this year on the 12 days, and I'd never come across this as I did the 12 days of nutrients, was how important copper is to wheat. There's a huge, huge, huge response. If you need it, I'm not the last thing on it. Scott, I think you can attest. I've never told you to put something on that the soil test didn't call for. Is that true?
True.
Because I only want to see you put things on that are going to get your response. But we do know that if you're copper deficient, that the response in wheat is very significant and it has a lot to do with plant health. It has to do with test weight. Again, helps with the amino acids, which convert into protein. Another real plus for doing that. And we want to do that. So you take your soil test. Now, you're not just putting NPK in that trench, though, correct? What else are you applying in that seed trench? What other nutrients are you looking at?
A lot of times we might have a little copper, depending on the crop, calcium, manganese, zinc in corn, especially even in some of the bean ground, calling for zinc in the seed trench. So I mean, and try to use we use a splitter, to put the fertilizer in the sidewalls of the seed trench. And so I mean, we can do a lot of, and especially with our soils, we have a lot of flexibility too with what we can do. And the nice thing about these soil samples and the recommendations that come back is it tells you whether you can do these things based off of your CEC, or whether you need to use a splitter, or whether you just can't do it at all and it's providing not just a blanket recommendation, but it's reading everything on that test.
I get amused by the people that they just have one standard recommendation they apply to every single acre. And that has not been very efficient nor effective for us. And so we've, shared the news and banged the drum to talk about doing it on a field by field basis. How much variation do you see across your farms there?
And for the ground here close to home, which is most of it now, 4 or 5 miles apart, we got some fields will be 6 gallons an acre of a starter, and others will be 2. Wow. So when I say we used to think of an average of 4, and that's what we kind of just used to do, or with the 31818 product, but we weren't putting it in the right place. We were over applying in one field and under applying another. So now that's why we soil sample each field every year, so we're putting the dollars in the right spot.
I had a friend one time use this example, Scott. He said that if you put 1 foot in a bucket of boiling hot water and 1 foot in a bucket full of ice cubes, the average is pretty good, but you're really miserable on both sides.
Yes.
And I think that's what you were doing, was you weren't getting the response that you needed either place.
No.
And so you're spending the same amount of dollars, you're just spending them differently and getting a better response on both sets, both on the 2 gallon to the acre and the 6 gallon to the acre. So that's kind of cool to see that happening. After you come in and you row place, the crop comes up, then you do some foliar feeding. What percentage of your crops do you foliar feed?
Well, 100% of our fields will get a foliar application, either with the herbicides in some cases or a special foliar pass. I don't do that on every field, but a lot of times we can cover most of that with the herbicide. So we're not making any extra trips and we're still getting it done. But sometimes if we really got a lot of need out there or conditions are tough, we try to apply it the best way possible. Sometimes that does require a special application.
Absolutely. But when you're only putting on, what are you spraying? A total of 5 gallon acre, and that includes water, or are you using more?
If we're going to try to put a foliar in, we will try to not be any more than 8 gallons if we have foliar fertilizers in there along with the herbicide. A lot of it's trying to get the right amount of pressure and particle size too. And that we have to have Mother Nature cooperate, but it gives a lot of flexibility to do things like that.
So what you're telling me, Scott, before we got on the recording here, you were discussing the wind tonight would not be conducive to foliar feeding. Is that true?
No, it's a nice brisk 0 with 50-mile-an-hour winds. So
not prime foliar feeding weather. So I get
no.
that. Excellent. How do you feel about, do you use much of the sugar?
Yes, we use sugar on 100%. And I just had this conversation with a guy yesterday who was asking me about sugar. And we use it on 100% of our acres. And in most cases, in the seed trench, and then 1 or 2 passes foliar.
So why are you putting a pint of sugar on 3 different times?
You know, we like to get in the soil and kind of speed up those microbes right off the bat, kind of feed them and get them excited when it's cold. And then we put it on the plant as it's coming up just to kind of keep everything moving. And I think it just really helps with the overall plant health and nutrient uptake. Maybe it just keeping everything alive and excited, I guess, in the soil and in the plant.
Absolutely. In the springtime, them bugs are a little sleepy. It's been a hard, they've survived out there tonight when it was 0 with a 50-mile-an-hour wind. And it's going to take them a little while to wake up come springtime. And I know that you have to, because of where you're located there, you're not waiting on a 60-degree soil temperature. I assume you're going to plant just as soon as the moisture's right. And if the soil temperature is 48, you might roll the planter. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, a lot of times it's not so much what the temperature is the day of planting, but what the forecast looks like 5 days from now, so we got to kind of do some things right in the soil to get started.
Absolutely. And that sugar is a big secret. That's kind of a cheat to help that biological activity wake up and get back to work there. And I'm excited for that. Scott, we also have a soil conditioner that I know you've been very excited about. Why do you use so much of that?
When I first started using that product, it was mainly as a surfactant just because I loved the job it did on a burn down. It just really seemed to help with the chemical uptake in the weeds. And that's kind of what got me started on it. And I knew there was other properties that it had and things it does. And I guess as I started seeing some of those things, and especially I told you a story about a custom strip tiller who came in my field one day doing some wheat stubble about a week after I had sprayed that field in a burn down, winter wheat in the fall. And he just commented on how mellow the soil was in our field. And that really kind of struck me that, it'd been a week since I put that on there, and I've been using it for several years at this point, and how it was really starting to help condition that soil.
Yeah, it really is cumulative. And a lot of people use that on every acre every year. And it just makes life a little better for you. It's one of the cheats that we have. It gets a bigger root mass. Well, Scott, I've taken a bunch of your time already. In fairness to you, I'll just say this. To the person who's found the podcast for the first time, and they're going, man, I don't know, there might be something to this. What are these guys talking about? What would you say to that guy that's going, ooh, I don't know if I want to call or not? What would you say to him?
It doesn't hurt to give somebody, especially this number, or reach out to us and give us a call, and get yourself to one of these 2 days of fundamental agronomy trainings. I mean, knowledge is power. So how do you hurt yourself by just getting a little more experience and just, run with that, whatever direction you feel like at that time?
Absolutely. Well, Scott, I really appreciate it. I'll wrap this thing up. Guys, we do appreciate you tuning in. Our goal here at A Better Way to Farm is to increase yields and improve profits. And that's what we're about every day. I would encourage you, if you didn't get a chance to listen to the 12 Days of Nutrients, because there's a ton of information in there that Scott has actually utilized. It's why he does a lot of what he does. And there's just some really good information there to help you make some better decisions. If you're interested in talking to us, you can reach out to Karen with a text at 641-919-5570. Scott, I just want to say thank you for your time. To the listeners, we appreciate you guys tuning in. And as always, we hope you're having a better day.